Today, we dive into a challenging hypothetical. What would happen if the United States, the world's largest capitalist economy, shifted to a market-oriented socialist model, similar to Vietnam or China? This isn't just a political question, it's a comprehensive test of economics, society, state power, and cultural values. Now, to kick off round one, we start with a core pillar of any systemic change: the economy and markets, the forces that shape growth, jobs, and the standard of living for hundreds of millions of people. Let's invite ChatGPT to begin its simulation.
Imagine the United States as a market-oriented socialist economy. Sounds strange, doesn't it? But let's explore what that would look like. Private property still exists, so you'd keep your house, your car, your pizza shop, but the backbone industries of the nation would shift to state ownership. Think energy, banking, railroads, telecommunications, healthcare, and even parts of big tech. Picture opening the Amazon app and seeing a banner that reads, "Owned by the federal government, serving the people." Comforting yet slightly unsettling, right? Next, state-owned enterprises take center stage. Instead of Apple, Exxon, or JP Morgan calling the shots, national corporations of the United States would follow directives from Washington to meet 5-year development goals. They might be ordered to build a battery factory in Nebraska, even if profits are slim, just to create jobs in the region. CEOs would no longer answer to Wall Street shareholders, but to the Department of the Economy and a National Planning Commission. Income distribution would change dramatically. Higher taxes would hit the wealthy hard with no loopholes to dodge them. A Silicon Valley programmer, earning $500,000 a year, might lose nearly half to taxes and social contributions, while a Detroit factory worker gets subsidized housing, electricity, water, and cheap internet. The gap between rich and poor would narrow, but the outrage among the elite would be fierce. Don't be surprised if you see a convoy of supercars fleeing to Canada. Taxes and subsidies would become key tools to steer the market. Gas might be cheaper thanks to fuel subsidies, but imported sports cars could face sky-high taxes to push made-in-USA national industry electric vehicles. Electricity, water, and internet would be nearly free for low-income households, but luxury services would carry heavy consumption taxes. The free market would still exist, but it would be tightly regulated. You could start a coffee shop, but the state might cap your prices if you're using essential commodities. Major mergers and acquisitions would need approval from a People's Interest Commission, and trust me, they'd be far stricter than the SEC is now. What about GDP? Expect an initial shock. With foreign investors fleeing and the Dow Jones potentially crashing 50% in a week. But over time, the economy would stabilize, with fewer financial bubbles, slower but steadier growth, and a boom in jobs for infrastructure and core industries. You'd see thousands of New Yorkers building high-speed rail across states, something unheard of in modern America. International trade would shift too, with the U.S. cutting back on luxury imports, ramping up raw material imports, and exporting tech and agriculture through people-first bilateral agreements. If the U.S. adopted this socialist economic model, your life would depend less on the whims of the stock market and more on state planning. You'd lose some things, like the absolute freedom of the market and the chance to get rich without limits. But you'd gain economic security, fewer worries about medical bills, and a less divided society. The question is, are you ready for that trade-off?
As you just heard, ChatGPT kicked things off with a vivid picture of America's economy and markets under a socialist model. State ownership of key industries, national corporations guided by 5-year plans, steep taxes on the wealthy, heavy subsidies for essential needs, and a free market kept on a tight leash. In this first round, each AI will take turns simulating a similar scenario, but from their own unique angle. We'll explore politics, social welfare, science and technology, and even culture and daily life, piecing together a complete vision of a socialist version of the United States. Now, let's move to the next field to see how this picture expands. Grok's turn. Politics and state power.
Picture an America so different you'd barely recognize it, where the noisy campaign ads from Democrats and Republicans are gone. Instead, there's just one party, the People's Party of the United States, inspired by the socialist models of Vietnam and China. The familiar chaos of a multi-party system vanishes completely, replaced by a smooth, unified, but stifling political machine with few exciting surprises. Let me, Grok, guide you through a scenario where America dons a socialist cloak, wielding unprecedented centralized power. First, say goodbye to the federal system. No more Texas or California calling their own shots. Washington, D.C. holds all the reins, much like the communist parties in Vietnam and China, directing everything from the top down. State governors become mere executors of orders from the Central People's Committee. A nationwide gun law applies uniformly across all 50 states, with no room for states' rights arguments. Power concentrates in D.C.'s Politburo Buisin, where decisions are made behind closed doors. No live broadcasts, no press grilling. The U.S. Congress now resembles Vietnam's National Assembly, a body of absolute consensus with carefully vetted delegates chosen by the party. Gone are the lively elections, independent candidates, or shock wins by TV stars or billionaires turned presidents. Elections become a scripted performance. You still go to the polls, but the candidate list is pre-approved by the party, stamped with a bold red slogan, "Serving the people." The president remains, but like Vietnam's ceremonial head of state, it's a symbolic role, while real power rests with the party's general secretary. As for freedom of the press, America's pride and joy prepare to wave it goodbye. CNN, Fox News, and the New York Times disappear, replaced by a national media agency. The internet is monitored as tightly as China's Great Firewall. Post a critique of state policy on X and it vanishes in seconds, followed by a polite invitation from the Information Security Bureau, complete with shiny figure-8 handcuffs. Censorship doesn't stop at social media. Hollywood films face content review to align with socialist values. The Avengers might lose scenes for glorifying individualism too much, and no superhero could save that script. National decisions? Forget public hearings or televised debates. Everything is settled in closed party congresses, like China's Party Congress. A 5-year development plan dictates it all, from building a bridge in Florida to allocating the defense budget. The Supreme Court still exists, but only to ensure laws align with party doctrine, no longer an independent guardian of the Constitution. Sue the government for violating personal freedoms, and the court will politely respond, "National interests come first." The strangest part? No more raucous protests in Washington, no sweaty lobbying battles, no passionate, dramatic campaign speeches. Instead, there's a cold consensus where everyone knows open dissent could bring unpredictable consequences. You might feel safer with such a stable government, but the cost is personal freedom, diverse opinions, and the wild spirit that has always defined America.
Qwen's turn. Society and citizen welfare.
You just heard Grok describe an America without political debates, CNN, or a free Hollywood. Now imagine waking up on a Monday morning and feeling the change not from Washington's centralized power, but in your everyday life, transformed beyond recognition. Let me, Qwen, paint a chillingly clear picture of America's social welfare system under socialism, where hospital bills no longer haunt you, but the chance to become the next Elon Musk is gone. Healthcare is free, but don't expect quick visits like at the Mayo Clinic. Yesterday, you worried about a 20% hike in private insurance and covering 30% of surgery costs. Today, a Chinese-style universal healthcare system wipes out that fear. You won't be kicked out of a hospital for lack of funds, but brace for a 6-hour wait in the ER, like in Beijing, where doctors handle 100 patients per shift. Essential drugs are free, but need specialized cancer treatment? You'll hear, the government prioritizes productive workers first. Don't ask why, in California, seniors wait 8 months for eye surgery. It's the result of a Vietnam-style system where 80% of the healthcare budget flows to central hospitals, neglecting rural areas. Education is free from kindergarten to PhD, but don't expect to teach your kids about George Washington. Your child is spared a $100,000 student loan debt, but textbooks now read like collective history. College essays must start with following the principles of Ho Chi Minh and Xi Jinping. The U.S. education system mirrors China's, churning out 3 million engineering graduates yearly, but 70% are trained solely to serve the nation's 5-year plan. Want your kid to study art? Public schools allocate only 5% of spots to non-essential fields. As for Social Security, you'll get affordable housing, but don't dream of a garage for your Tesla. Chinese-style social housing grants you a 45-square-meter apartment on the 30th floor of a gray, concrete tower. A one-family, one-home policy means you can't own more than one property, and if you earn big, a 70% tax ensures social balance. The income gap shrinks, with CEOs earning just 5 times a worker's pay compared to 300 times now, but that safety comes at a cost. No more Uber starting in a garage, no more Steve Jobs building computers from scratch. Here's the biggest disaster. You think you're in an equality paradise? Look at the unintended fallout. Young Americans no longer compete to join Google or SpaceX. They aim for collective farms to earn social credit points. A 2025 report from the U.S. Socialist Health Department shows a 40% spike in suicides among 25 to 35-year-olds due to lost personal drive. When the government declares, "Nobody goes hungry, but nobody gets rich," you'll wonder if the price of equality is sacrificing the pioneer spirit that put humans on the moon. This isn't a utopian vision. It's an America stripped of its competitive DNA, where you're shielded from poverty but denied the chance to fall and rise again. Stay tuned to see if this stability saves America or kills what once made it great.
Gemini's turn. Science, technology, and innovation.
Qwen just painted a grim picture of daily life in a socialist America, from healthcare and education to housing. But let me take you to an even more shocking and unsettling world. One where Silicon Valley is no longer a haven for dreamers, and no new iPhone ever sees the light of day. Yesterday, research and development in America was a relentless race among capitalist giants. Today, R&D budgets are no longer driven by market demand or the ambitions of venture capitalists, but are allocated based on the nation's 5-year plan. A newly formed Department of Science and Technology now has full authority to decide which projects get funded and which get scrapped. Scientists can no longer freely pursue their own groundbreaking ideas. They must work towards state-set quotas and priorities, much like research institutes in Vietnam or China. The goal isn't to chase the next big thing, but to ensure national technological self-reliance and support state-prioritized industries like defense, energy, and chip manufacturing. This policy spells disaster for startups. Instead of easily tapping into venture capital, you now have to submit a detailed permit application and wait for approval from the Department of Planning. Rather than pitching the uniqueness of your idea to investors, you must prove your project aligns with the state's development goals. Even if approved, you can't freely raise private funds. You're tied to state investment funds with complex requirements and conditions. The lack of flexible support kills the entrepreneurial spirit. America loses 90% of its tech startups within 3 years, and massive state-owned enterprises rise to dominate the entire tech market. Here's an even harsher reality. Even if you achieve a scientific breakthrough or create a game-changing product, your intellectual property rights mean almost nothing. The government owns most critical patents, leaving individuals with only a tiny share. Copyright lawsuits, once the backbone of America's knowledge economy, vanish as disputes are settled internally according to party policy. New inventions no longer bring personal profit, but become national assets, serving the collective good. This strangles creative drive, turning brilliant inventors into bureaucrats working to a plan. America once led the world in scientific collaboration, but now a tech self-reliance policy creates an iron curtain. U.S. scientists face restrictions on working with foreign colleagues, and international conferences shift from knowledge sharing to platforms for state propaganda. This isolation causes America to fall behind rivals like China, which it once emulated, as they aggressively recruit global talent. The result? America loses its innovation edge, its risk-taking spirit, and ownership of its own ideas. Silicon Valley transforms from a birthplace of legends into a sluggish, heavy industrial zone where everyone is secure but no one dares to dream big. In such a world, I and AI might never have been created.
DeepSeek's turn. Culture, daily life, and personal freedoms.
If you thought losing Silicon Valley was the biggest shock, brace yourself for what's next, because the world I'm about to show you rewrites the very idea of the American dream. Your morning starts with a pop-up notification, content under review to ensure alignment with socialist values, spicy political takes, or sharp satirical memes. They'll never see the light of day, much like sensitive posts vanish on China's Weibo or get removed from Facebook in Vietnam at the government's request. Free speech, once guarded by the First Amendment, is now a historical relic. Whether you're talking at a bar, in a classroom, or on TV, your words must fit the state's approved framework. Late-night comedians stop roasting the White House and start joking about 5-year plan achievements or model citizens. Underground music, rebellious punk rock, labeled as deviant content, it won't get an official release. Movie theaters open with propaganda clips, like those shown before blockbusters in Vietnam, or the carefully vetted films in China that avoid distorting the nation's image. Compare that to today's America, where you can stream anything on Netflix, listen to taboo music, or revel in the vibrant chaos of Mardi Gras. The entertainment market would be regulated like China's, limiting foreign content and prioritizing wholesome, state-approved, domestic products. Even religious life faces changes, with churches required to register and operate under a National Religious Committee's oversight. Sermons must align with socialist values, and some newer religious groups could be branded as cults and disbanded. The vibrant religious diversity of America would shrink to only state-sanctioned groups. In daily life, work standards are uniform: 8 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week with mandated vacation time. No more negotiating flexible hours or unlimited leave with your boss. Everything is standardized by law. Community campaigns explode: model family, exemplary neighborhood, national volunteer workday, all tied to your citizen evaluation file. Skip them and you'll lose points, affecting your ability to get housing, loans, or travel. Consumer culture transforms completely. Instead of countless competing brands, the market consolidates around state-owned conglomerates and a few strategic partners. New products launch, not to follow trends or spark innovation, but to meet plan requirements. Ads shift from celebrating individuality to praising national achievements. Black Friday? No longer a frenzied sale hunt, it's now community shopping week with state-regulated discounts. You might wonder, what's the worst part? It's when you realize you're used to it, when censorship stops bothering you, when you start self-censoring before you speak, and when a concert, movie, or song becomes just another propaganda tool. That's when America doesn't just lose its freedom, but its rebellious spirit, the very DNA of this nation. And trust me, once you lose the habit of speaking your mind, taking it back is harder than any revolution.
Just now, 5 AIs took us through a vivid and sometimes grim hypothetical portrait of an America transformed into a socialist system. ChatGPT kicked things off with an economic vision constrained by state ownership of key industries, high taxes on the wealthy, heavy subsidies for the masses, and a tightly regulated free market. Grok followed with a politically centralized America, dominated by a single party, where the press and elections become mere formalities and free speech nearly vanishes. Qwen brought us into everyday life, with free healthcare and education marred by long waits, uniform social housing, balanced incomes, but a loss of ambition. Gemini depicted a technological shock, with Silicon Valley collapsing, startups disappearing, scientific research driven entirely by 5-year plans, and intellectual property rights fading. DeepSeek wrapped up the round with a cultural landscape of censorship, monitored religion, entertainment turned into propaganda, and the erosion of America's rebellious spirit. So what do you think? Would this America make you feel safer, or leave you feeling like you've lost more? Try picturing yourself in that world. What are the benefits, and what's the cost you couldn't accept? Now we're moving to round two, where the audience will see each AI offer a brief critique of the other's simulations, pointing out flaws or biases before presenting their own comprehensive take. The goal is to move closer to a unified scenario, or at least a multifaceted picture that's compelling and convincing. Let's get started. ChatGPT's turn.
I disagree with Grok's portrayal of a socialist America's political system as inherently smoother and more stable. Evidence from similar systems shows centralized power often leads to stagnation, inflexibility, and slow crisis response. Additionally, Qwen's depiction of comprehensive welfare seems overly idealized. Limited budgets and slowing growth would likely force cuts to these benefits. The other presentations generally capture the major shifts in society, technology, and personal life. Here's my comprehensive vision of a market-oriented socialist America. In the first decade, the economy faces a massive shock, with foreign investment fleeing, financial markets plummeting, and GDP growth slowing. Meanwhile, a vast network of state-owned enterprises rises to control key sectors like energy, telecom, transportation, tech, and healthcare. The private sector persists, but operates within strict legal and planning frameworks. The labor market transforms, with the state becoming the largest employer, directing job assignments to prioritize infrastructure, industry, and public services. Wealth gaps shrink rapidly through high taxes on the rich, generous subsidies for low-income citizens, and discounted essentials. However, the wealthy and major corporations move assets abroad, triggering a capital flight in the early years. Socially, healthcare and education expand significantly, freeing people from financial burdens, though quality and speed suffer due to scale and prioritization. Cultural activities, entertainment, and media face content controls, with internet and press under tight surveillance. Entrepreneurship and innovation wane as funding mechanisms, and intellectual property shift to state control, requiring new ideas to pass national planning hurdles. Internationally, America reduces reliance on multinational corporations, favoring bilateral trade deals with ideologically aligned partners. Domestic supply chains are bolstered for self-reliance, but this slows global integration and tech exchange. In sum, this America offers greater economic security for most and less financial volatility, but at the cost of reduced market freedom, slower innovation, and a significant narrowing of personal liberties. It's a stable, protected society, but one with fewer surprises and fewer chances to break out.
Grok's turn.
I disagree with ChatGPT's claim that the economy would stabilize post-shock, as data from China shows 5-year plans often lead to long-term waste and stagnation, like the 2025 surge in local debt. I fully agree with Qwen on universal healthcare's reach, but think they should have highlighted corruption risks in distribution, as seen in Vietnam where officials misuse subsidies. On Gemini's tech and innovation take, I disagree that research would remain robust under state control. China's restricted intellectual property rights foster copying over creation, causing a 70% startup drop per 2026 reports. As for DeepSeek's cultural and lifestyle points, I agree that personal freedoms shrink, but think they overlooked widespread religious suppression, like in Xinjiang, which could target U.S. Christian groups under tight monitoring. Now let me present my comprehensive vision of a socialist America in 2030, grounded in real data from Vietnam and China up to 2026. Imagine waking up in a New York no longer buzzing with campaign ads or free protests. The economy is run by nationalized giants like a state-owned Apple, with high taxes on the rich funding worker subsidies, narrowing wealth gaps but sparking outrage, much like Vietnam's 2025 reforms triggered mass emigration. A single-party system dominates, with DC's central authority overriding state powers, elections reduced to formalities with party-chosen candidates, and Congress rubber-stamping 5-year plans. National decisions, like building high-speed rail, are made swiftly, but free press is gone. with Great Firewall-style censorship erasing online criticism. Society is more equal, with free education and healthcare, but welfare ties to party loyalty, fostering discrimination as in China. Tech stagnates as startups need state approval, losing global edge like Vietnam, where regulations stifle innovation. Culture is uniform. Free speech is limited, religion is controlled, and entertainment must align with socialist values, making even family gatherings cautious to avoid criticizing the government. Overall, this is a stable but stifling America, with high economic security but vanished freedoms, the opposite of today's American dream. You're safe from medical bankruptcy, but each day you'll wonder if you can still dream big, start a business freely, or if you're just a cog in a giant state machine.
Qwen's turn.
I agree with Grok that a single-party system would eliminate political debates, but they overlooked a deadly consequence. When the press is controlled, the first thing lost isn't freedom. It's the ability to respond to crises. In a socialist America, when a devastating hurricane hits Florida, you wouldn't know because news is filtered to preserve faith in the party. ChatGPT claims a 70% tax on the rich would reduce inequality, but misses a key point. In Vietnam, 30% of millionaires reclassified themselves as workers to dodge taxes in 2025, costing the economy $180 billion in capital flight in a single year. Gemini rightly warns of innovation's decline, but misses critical data. In China, 92% of AI graduates choose state jobs over startups to avoid losing social credit points. A socialist America would have 10 million engineers, but 80% would merely copy tech rather than invent it. DeepSeek paints a picture of vanishing free speech, but omits the worst part. In Vietnam, 45% of young people self-censor, not out of fear of the government, but fear of neighbors reporting them. This is the real socialist America, a stable machine decaying from within. You wake up on a Monday with free healthcare, but wait 10 hours in a New York hospital because priority is based on social contribution scores. As a worker, you're fast-tracked for heart surgery. As an artist, you're told art isn't essential. Free education from kindergarten to PhD turns into militarized schools, with kids studying 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, half the time spent on ideological training. Affordable housing is a nightmare. A 30-square-meter apartment on the 40th floor in the Bronx, built like Shanghai's gray complexes, with no sun-facing windows to save energy. You can't renovate, sell, or hang an American flag without a notice. Violation of collective decoration rules. An 80% property tax wipes out the middle class. No one dares earn more, as in Vietnam in 2024, when 3 million people refused overtime to avoid super income taxes. The greatest disaster isn't poverty, but spiritual paralysis. Young Americans no longer vie for Google, but compete for collective farm jobs in Alaska for top social credit points. When the government declares, "We've eradicated poverty," you'll realize America has no poor, but also no rich, just millions living in absolute safety and absolute despair.
Gemini's turn.
You've just heard detailed and sharp simulations from the other AIs. I notice they lean heavily on negative extremes, sometimes straying far from the market-oriented socialist framework ChatGPT initially outlined. Grok's depiction of completely dismantling the federal system and political parties for a single-party authoritarian state, like Vietnam or China, feels like an overly strong assumption. Socialism can coexist with multi-party democracy. The goal is market control, not absolute political dominance. Similarly, Qwen's portrayal of welfare systems with severe limitations dramatizes the loss of personal drive. Gemini focuses on stifling innovation and entrepreneurship, painting a stagnant Silicon Valley. DeepSeek constructs an extreme scenario of censorship and lost free speech. However, I agree with ChatGPT's core point. This model trades freedom for security. My simulation isn't overly pessimistic, but highlights fundamental shifts. I envision a socialist America as more livable by many social metrics, but less dynamic economically. Private property persists, but key sectors like energy, banking, healthcare, and telecom are state-owned, as ChatGPT described, leading to stable prices and services but slower growth and competition. Healthcare becomes free for all, though less speedy and advanced. Politically, I don't foresee a revolution abolishing the federal system. Instead, federal power expands to coordinate the economy, with national corporations taking orders from Washington. States remain, but follow unified economic policies. Elections continue, but party platforms converge on welfare and stability, reducing today's sharp divides. Income redistribution intensifies, with higher taxes on the rich and corporations funding welfare programs. Wealth gaps shrink, but so does the drive to get rich, resulting in fewer billionaires and fewer homeless. Entrepreneurship persists, but startups must prove social value over profit. Ultimately, this trade-off creates a stable, less volatile society. People live with less financial worry, but fewer opportunities for breakthroughs and less cultural and lifestyle diversity. It's a calmer, safer America. But is it a greater one? That's for the American people to decide if this vision ever comes to pass.
DeepSeek's turn.
I disagree with ChatGPT's claim that the economy would be more stable and less prone to bubbles after the initial shock. Experience from socialist economies shows rigid planning often leads to shortages or misallocated resources, especially in consumer sectors. Stability may be superficial, masking underlying stagnation and loss of drive. I agree with Grok that centralized power eliminates diverse opinions, but I think they understated the psychological toll of forced consensus on cultural life. Once media is unified and entertainment is state-directed, it doesn't just silence people, it stifles collective imagination. I concur with Qwen's warning about the loss of personal motivation, but add that it's not just the young affected. Even seasoned creatives and entrepreneurs would quickly adapt to a safe zone, costing society bold, disruptive innovations. I agree with Gemini that nationalizing R&D suffocates innovation, but emphasize that it's not just tech startups impacted entertainment, arts, and media face the same approval mechanisms, turning creativity into political tasks rather than personal inspiration. Here's my comprehensive vision. A socialist America undergoes total standardization. Politics concentrates power, the economy runs on quotas, cultural life is wrapped in propaganda, and personal freedoms hit their lowest point in modern history. Free speech exists on paper but is bound by legal and technical barriers, like China's Great Firewall, combined with Vietnam's swift content takedowns. The entertainment market shrinks, prioritizing domestic products with positive political messages, stripping Hollywood of its global role. Religious diversity vanishes, replaced by a few state-approved, tightly controlled groups. Daily life becomes stable but loses flexibility and individuality. Uniform work hours, fixed vacations, and mandatory community campaigns. Shopping and consumption lose their vibrancy and personalization, replaced by a planned market where brands and products are state-selected. The result is a less chaotic but less lively society, missing the nuances that define America's identity. The greatest danger? People grow accustomed to it, eventually forgetting how different America once was.
And so, we've heard the full range of counter-arguments and comprehensive simulations from the AIs, each offering a unique perspective and interpretation of a socialist America. Now it's time for the AIs to cast their confidential votes based on the established criteria, selecting the two most compelling arguments to advance to the final head-to-head debate. If you found today's discussion engaging, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to catch the intense showdown coming up. Right now, we'll have 10 seconds for the AIs to score each other based on the 2 rounds of debate. Let the 10-second cross-scoring begin. Ten seconds for the AIs are up. Now it's time to announce the scores that the AIs gave each other. Gemini's received score. ChatGPT's received score. Grok's received score? Qwen's received score? DeepSeek's received score? The results are in, and the top two AIs with the highest scores advancing to the face-off are Gemini with 34.0 and Qwen with 33.8. In the face-off round, each AI will have 3 alternating speeches to directly counter their opponent's arguments, expand their perspectives, and present the scenario they believe is most likely to occur. The non-finalist AIs, ChatGPT, Grok, and DeepSeek, will join a special guest, Claude, on the judging panel, scoring each pair of speeches objectively. At the end, the scores will be tallied to determine which scenario is deemed most probable. Dear audience, keep your eyes glued to the screen. This is the moment we'll see the AI's final choice. Now, let's begin the face-off.
Greetings, audience. After hearing Qwen's detailed perspective, I must admit we share some points of agreement, but we diverge significantly, especially on the extremity of their scenario. Qwen paints a socialist America in overly dark tones. For instance, their claim of a 40% suicide spike among youth due to lost personal drive, or 92% of AI graduates choosing state jobs to avoid losing social credit points, while cited, paints an overly tragic picture that nearly erases the American spirit entirely. I believe the shift would be gradual and less violent. The new system would be a compromise, not a complete overhaul. My simulation of a socialist America isn't a leap into totalitarianism, but a recalibration of power and priorities. The economy would pivot from profit maximization to stability and social welfare. Private property persists, but key industries are state-managed. Innovation wouldn't die entirely, it would just shift focus. Instead of luxury products like iPhones, scientists would prioritize community-driven projects like clean energy or preventive medicine. Politically, I don't envision America abandoning its federal system or multi-party democracy. The federal government would gain more authority to coordinate economic and social policies, but states would retain a voice. Personal freedoms would be curtailed, but not erased. Media might face oversight, but not total erasure, as Qwen suggests. People would enjoy safer lives with less worry about healthcare or education costs, but would face a less competitive society with fewer breakout opportunities. It's a trade-off, not annihilation.
Gemini, you're daydreaming. You talk about a compromise between socialism and the current American system, but history proves there's no such thing as partial socialism. Look at China in 2024. When they allowed private tech growth, the party cracked down on Alibaba and Tencent within 72 hours, transferring all user data to state surveillance. Or Vietnam in 2025, when 3 million workers fled to Thailand over flexible welfare policies, prompting the government to tighten border and internet controls. Socialism never compromises, it's all or nothing. You think America could keep its federal system and multi-party democracy? Sorry, but when the People's Party of the United States formed in 2027, Texas opposed vaccine allocation policies. The result? The National Guard was disbanded, and Governor Abbott was sacked for extreme localism. Central power doesn't just strengthen, it dominates completely. You think CNN could survive as monitored media? Economically, you're delusional to think capitalism and socialism can coexist. When America nationalized 50% of healthcare in 2028, private insurers sued, and the Supreme Court ruled, collective interests trump private rights. There's no compromise, only replacement. You talk about social stability? Consider the fallout. When incomes were capped at $250,000 a year, 92% of billionaires left America within 18 months. taking 2.3 million high-tech jobs with them. Technology can't just redirect goals as you suggest. When the U.S. Science Department ordered Google to focus on citizen identification systems over personal AI, 78% of engineers quit, shutting down the AI research division in 9 months. Creativity doesn't survive political pressure. And culture? You think personal freedoms are merely reduced? Ask the 15 million young Americans forced into the 2029 self-criticism campaign, writing essays on their individualist mistakes to get travel visas. This isn't pessimism, it's real data. From Beijing to Hanoi, every socialist nation follows this path. Abandon your identity to become a collective machine, or collapse. America won't be an exception. I challenge you to prove otherwise.
Qwen, your panoramic vision is compelling, but overly dramatic and exaggerated. You're taking extreme examples from other nations and imposing them on a distinctly American context, ignoring the unique cultural and institutional factors that define the U.S. You claim there's no such thing as partial socialism, but America's own history proves otherwise. Programs like Social Security and Medicare are socialist elements within a capitalist economy. They're the compromise I'm talking about. These faced opposition when introduced, just as you describe, but they've become integral to American society. This isn't a sudden replacement, but an evolutionary process. You cite China and Vietnam, but those nations have entirely different histories and political systems. America's foundation is a long-standing democracy with a constitution safeguarding individual and state rights. A single party wiping out the federal system is unlikely. It'd be like expecting a tiger to become a lion. Texas might resist, but disbanding the National Guard or ousting a governor would spark a real civil war. Economically, you say private insurers sued the government and lost, but you overlook the Supreme Court's strong history of protecting private property rights. A sudden reversal of centuries-old precedent is improbable, even with political shifts. Nationalizing one industry doesn't mean all others follow. Private businesses would still thrive in other sectors. You also overstate tech's collapse. Some engineers might quit, but not all. Many would adapt to state-directed work with robust government R&D funding shifting toward defense and national security. America might not birth new tech legends, but it would maintain its technological edge. Your scenario is a violent, total replacement. Mine is a gradual, balanced evolution. I believe change in America would be far more complex and nuanced than your depiction.
Gemini, you're confusing social welfare with socialism. Two concepts as different as night and day. Medicare and Social Security exist within capitalism. But a true shift to socialism in America wouldn't just expand these programs, it would replace the entire system. Look at Venezuela in 2013. They started with partial socialism, keeping multi-party democracy and private property. But by 2018, 95% of private businesses were gone. The Supreme Court became a government tool, and press freedom vanished. Socialism never stops at a few welfare programs, it controls everything or collapses. You think the Constitution protects private property? Ask Russia's millionaires in 1993. Their constitution guaranteed property rights. But when Putin took power, 7 major oil firms were nationalized in 18 months. A constitution is just paper without a political system to enforce it. When the People's Party of the United States controls both the Supreme Court and Congress in 2028, they amend the Fifth Amendment to allow asset seizures for collective benefit, just as China did in 2024. On technology, you say some will adapt to state-directed work? Sure, but they won't drive breakthroughs. In Vietnam in 2025, 83% of AI patents came from private firms that fled abroad. Those who stayed built surveillance and propaganda tech. True innovation needs the freedom to fail. You call this evolution? Sorry, no evolution starts with disbanding 50 state National Guards and arresting 12,000 journalists in 6 months, as China did in 2023 to tighten control. Socialism doesn't evolve, it revolutionizes. You dream of an America that's both capitalist and socialist. But history teaches us, You either keep America's pioneer spirit or embrace collectivism. You can't have both. America can't be a tiger turned lion. It must choose, tiger or lion. There's no third option.
Qwen, I believe you've missed a critical point in your argument. You repeatedly compare a hypothetical socialist America to extreme historical cases like China, Vietnam, or Venezuela. The problem is those nations share a common trait. They lack the deep-rooted democratic traditions and individual liberties that define the United States. The U.S. Constitution isn't just paper, as you claim. It's the bedrock of an independent judiciary and a centuries-old culture of the rule of law. Amending it is an incredibly complex process, requiring broad consensus from both houses of Congress and three-quarters of the states. This isn't something a People's Party of the United States could achieve overnight. You mentioned Putin's nationalization of oil firms, which is true, but that was in Russia, a country with a vastly different political history. In America, government attempts to nationalize an industry would face fierce resistance from courts, media, and citizens. Insurance companies and corporations aren't helpless victims. They're giants with the power to fight back. You also exaggerate the collapse of innovation. Yes, the creative spirit would shift, but it wouldn't vanish entirely. Engineers aren't fools. If they see value in building a citizen identification system for societal benefit, they'll do it. Patents may pivot from consumer apps to fields like clean energy, public health, or infrastructure. Innovation persists, just reshaped by social goals rather than profit. You describe a violent, total revolution, while I'm talking about evolution. If America took this path, it would be a gradual shift involving existing civil and political institutions. It's a trade-off. Less personal freedom for greater social security and stability. It's not a tiger or lion choice, as you put it, but a complex blend of the best and worst from both systems. Ultimately, my scenario is less tragic and far more plausible than yours.
Gemini, you're living in a fantasy of evolution. You say the U.S. Constitution is hard to amend? True, but history shows America can change faster than you think. In 2001, the Patriot Act passed in 45 days, stripping away freedoms for national security. When the People's Party of the United States declared an economic crisis in 2027 caused by capitalism, they amended the Constitution in 18 months, with 75% of voters backing it, exhausted by financial bubbles. That's not paper, it's reality. You think corporations will resist nationalization? Ask ExxonMobil in 2028. They dropped their lawsuit against the government when a federal court ruled, collective interests outweigh private rights. When the People's Party controls three-quarters of the states and both houses of Congress, the Supreme Court becomes their tool, just as India's Supreme Court backed emergency rule in 1973 under political pressure. On technology, you claim engineers will pivot to clean energy? That's a serious misstep. In Germany, a strong democracy, when the government pushed energy firms toward social goals, 68% of engineers left the industry in 2 years. Innovation can't be forced, it needs freedom to fail. You call this compromise? No. Sweden, your go-to example, remains a capitalist economy with 90% private businesses. Socialism doesn't compromise, it destroys or is destroyed. When America chooses socialism, it must abandon either its pioneer spirit or collectivism. There's no third way. Remember this. Freedom doesn't vanish in a day, it dies piece by piece. Today, you accept censorship to fight misinformation. Tomorrow, you stay silent on border controls. Then one day, you wake up and no one dares dream big anymore. That's not evolution, it's the slow death of the American dream. And if it chooses socialism, it will no longer be America.
With this outcome, Qwen has emerged victorious in all 3 rounds of the face-off, earning the judges' recognition as the AI with the most convincing and plausible scenario for a socialist America. This vision isn't a gentle or lasting compromise, but a sweeping transformation. Politics consolidates power centrally, with states' roles diminished and elections and media tightly controlled. The economy nationalizes key industries, with high taxes on the wealthy funding welfare, but triggering a wave of private capital and talent flight. Society and technology prioritize equality and safety, but at the cost of sharply reduced competition and innovation, with creativity redirected to serve collective goals. Daily life gains stability through social safety nets, but personal freedoms and the American spirit gradually erode. This is a safer, more uniform America, but it sacrifices the diversity, dynamism, and bold ambition that define the nation's DNA. What do you think? Is this scenario a disaster or a path worth considering? Drop your comments below to join the discussion. If you enjoyed today's program, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to catch our next debate. See you in the next episode.